Welcome to Masters of Product Management, a show that gives you real-world techniques and cutting-edge strategies to learn, apply, and succeed in product management. Now, here's the master himself, Stephen Haines.
Welcome back, everyone, to Masters of Product Management. I'm Stephen Haines from Sequent Learning Networks. So I don't know about you, but there isn't a day that goes by in my life that I don't hear about some product failure in one form or another. And listen, we are all customers, and we're customers of companies, and we're users of products. And I drive my car, and I'm distracted by my screen, and I don't understand where the control is, or I can't figure out how my television works, or my remote control is screwed up. And it seems like people design products with some features and functionality that isn't delivered the way that I need it delivered. And it's like I'm the customer, and who cares about me as a customer? While companies actually say that, they don't always do what's needed. So the other day, I was listening to the Wharton Business Radio, and I heard an interview with Tony Ulwick. And I said to myself, I wanted Tony on this show, because I think his passion for customers and even some of the methods that he's using to understand what customers need, what motivates them, what drives them is really critical. And today I'm truly, truly honored to have Tony Ulwick on the show. Tony is the founder of the advisory firm Strategian, and he's got some best-selling books. He's got a book called What Customers Want, which defined a new era in customer-centric innovation. And it was based on this jobs to be done innovation theory. And the more recent book that he's done is called Jobs to be Done Theory to Practice. And he's got articles at Harvard Business Review and MIT Sloan. He's been cited in hundreds of publications. And Tony, thank you. Welcome to the show.
Well, Steve, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, it's wonderful. So as we spoke in advance, there are a couple of topics I really wanted to explore with you today. But before we start, could you talk a little bit to our listeners where and how your passion for customers began?
I'd be happy to. Sure. This was the start of my interest in innovation really occurred back in my early days at IBM. I worked there as a process engineer. We were creating a product called the PC Junior, and I was responsible for designing it for manufacturability. We spent a good year and a half on the product, and this was IBM's entree into the growing home computer market. And we were extremely excited about this. The product was touted to be a huge success. We thought we were going to be changing the world. And the day after the product was introduced, the headlines in the Wall Street Journal read, "The PC Junior is a flop." And of course, we were by that. We didn't believe it, but it was true. It was a flop. It took us about a year to come to grips with the reality. And it really got me thinking, how did they know that it was a flop the day it was introduced? And why didn't we, more importantly? What metrics were they using to decide that this was not going to work in the marketplace? And I thought, gosh, if we only had known what those metrics were, we could just design the product around those metrics, and the result would have been a lot better. So that started my thought process on my interest in innovation, to figure out what are those metrics, and are they capturable and knowable well in advance, and can we use them to help guide the innovation process?
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. It's a lot of leaders talk about using data and using measurements, and very often we don't. We suppose and we make assumptions and things like that. And so I want to segue into another area here, and that is, first of all, I acknowledge as a product guy and a fellow author, I can't emphasize enough why you have to understand customers and what they need, and I talk about it almost in every show from different angles, and sometimes, actually most times, customers don't even know what they don't know, and they don't know what they want. What's your general take on this concept?
Well, certainly customers don't know what solutions they want. Of course, they shouldn't. They're not the engineers and the scientists and the materials experts. They don't know of these new technologies coming down the pike and what they could do and how they could be used. So don't ask them that. Right? We don't ask customers what solutions they want. What we need to do is to figure out what inputs do we need from a customer in order to be effective in innovation. And so when I think about it that way, this is why we like focusing on the job to be done. Um, if we think about innovation as a process, we're trying to come up with solutions that address unmet needs. Um, like in any good equation, there has to be a constant in the equation. And if you think about innovation, of course, solutions are variables, right? They're ever changing. And I like asking my clients, well, what about needs? Are needs ever changing? And most of them say, yeah, they're constantly changing. That's why this is so hard. And this is really the problem. What we got to do is define needs in a way that makes them a constant in the equation. And this is why focusing on the underlying job is so critical, because the job is actually stable over time. And if you can capture the metrics that people are using to measure success when getting a job done, those metrics can be stable over time. And you can create this list of metrics, there's usually 100 or more, that people use to measure their success when getting a job done. And once you have all those metrics and can prioritize them and figure out where customers are underserved, we can test different concepts against that set of metrics to see which one will get the job done best. And those that get the job done best generally win in the marketplace.
So, because I hope you don't mind, I'm like salivating over this whole thing. What metrics? What are some of the metrics that you have used successfully to assess these customer needs and motivations?
Well, we call these metrics the customer's desired outcomes. It's a name that we give to a statement that I'll say, invented. It's kind of odd to say you invented a need statement, but unfortunately, needs have to be communicated in words. And those words have to have meaning to both the customer and to the organization. So we sat back and thought, well, what characteristics do these need statements have to have? Well, first off, as I mentioned, they have to be a constant in the equation, stable over time, something we can test ideas and concepts against to see which ones work. So this is why we focus on the underlying job. And we call these outcomes the metrics that people use to measure success when getting a job done. So if in the case of Bosch helping people with a circular saw cut wood in a straight line, those metrics might be minimize the likelihood that the cut gets started in the wrong location, or minimize the likelihood that the cut goes off track, or minimize the likelihood that sawdust blows up into the user's face as they're progressing with the cut. Now, naturally, these are all things that users think about as they're trying to get the job done. And our goal is to capture all these statements in this format and include them in surveys where we can figure out which ones are important, not well satisfied, or overserved. And we can figure out where people are struggling to get the job done. And of course, if we know how people measure success and where they're struggling, we can create products that address those unmet outcomes.
So it sounds to me like metrics are there isn't a standard set of metrics. We have to go into the environment where the customer lives in order to figure out what those are. And you're talking about the circular saw example, and I remember listening to you on the show, and you were talking about the Bosch circular saw example, and this goes back to even what Ted Levitt wrote 50 or 60 years ago, and that customers don't want this 1/4-inch drill; they really want the 1/4-inch hole. Can you talk a little bit more about that Bosch circular saw example that I had heard you speak about that got me so incredibly excited about talking with you?
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to. The analogy there is pretty good. It's because it's Levitt says people don't want the 1/4-inch drill; they want the 1/4-inch hole. And in Bosch's case, they wanted to enter the North American circular saw market. They had the Skill brand, but they wanted to enter with the Bosch brand, with a premium saw that would get the job done better and maybe at the same price point as competing solutions. So the case there is, tradesmen don't want circular saws. What they want is to cut wood in a straight line. So instead of studying circular saws and going out and asking people what features do they want on a circular saw, we go out and study this underlying job of cutting a piece of wood in a straight line, independent of the circular saw. In fact, we could even look at other methods for cutting a piece of wood in a straight line, like a table saw, or other methods, or just a hand saw. There's lots of different competing methods to cut a piece of wood in a straight line, and so we go out and look at what that job is comprised of, all the different steps where you're planning the cut, laying it out, and making sure that you're going to achieve the right result. And then you begin cutting, make sure you start in the right place, you progress along the cut over some period of time, and then eventually you finish the cut and you have to then finish off the wood and maybe sand it down and get it ready for inclusion in a structure. So we go through that entire process independent of the solution. We think of all the metrics that they're using to measure success and value. And I mentioned some of them already. And knowing what those metrics are allows you to build, the way I think about it, is a data model. Right? So you have all these metrics that people are trying to achieve when they're cutting a piece of wood in a straight line. And once we know what they are and prioritize them, we can test different solutions. And interestingly, with the Bosch group, once we presented them with in their case, there were 14 unmet needs that we discovered through our research. And once we presented those needs to the team, it took them just 3 hours to come up with the solution. And as they said, well, it's not as if we hadn't been thinking about all this before. We've had thousands of ideas. The problem is we didn't know what those unmet needs were, what metrics people were struggling, or where they were struggling to get the job done. So they included those features in their circular saw. It became their top grossing and most profitable circular saw in North America. And we made that for about 10 years or so. So it's really, it's a great story. It's simple in the sense that cutting a piece of wood in a straight line is a lot like getting the quarter-inch hole. So it reaches that level of simplicity in the analogy. But most of the projects that we work on are far more complex than that, involving multiple users in many cases and a whole variety of other factors that can complicate it. But the principles remain the same.
Well, absolutely. I'm a big believer that a product manager ought to learn how to walk in the customer's shoes. And again, when I heard you tell that story, and I'm a woodworker, okay, but I found myself in a variety of situations, and my state of need is different. So when I'm cutting a piece of plywood along a straight line, I got 8 feet to go. My job to be done is a lot more complicated than I'm cutting a 45 degree angle on a 2x4. Or cutting a leg on a table I'm building. So there are different applications and different need states that I have, and it sounds to me like that's sort of the thing that you were doing and trying to study to diagnose what was going on with that customer. And I probably should go buy one of those saws.
Well, you bring it.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you're bringing up a great point because what we discovered in the quantitative research is that not everyone struggles in the same way to get the job done. And what we discovered is exactly what you're saying. We found people that are cutting just 2x4s or just roofers, framers, and they didn't have to make a lot of blade height adjustments, angle adjustments. It didn't matter really where they started or ended the cut. It didn't really even have to be straight for that matter. So they were very happy with the products that they have today. But what we found is a segment of woodworkers that had to make these, like you said, long finish cuts and angle cuts. They had to make more blade height adjustments and angle adjustments. They were getting the cord cut on the cord caught on the back of wood as they're making their way through the cuts. So they were experiencing issues that nobody else did. And that's what we discovered. It was about a third of the market had that set of unmet needs, and that became the target segment that they focused on. And the only way to discover that is to look for segments of customers with different unmet needs. And that's how we approach it. We actually segment the market around unmet needs.
Well, this is, and what we're really talking about is this, we use the word, customer problem and customer need almost interchangeably, because the problem becomes present sometimes. It's not present all the time. It tends to be a little bit transient. So we have to take this opportunity to really see what that customer is doing, when the customer is doing it, and really associate some need that they have with the solution to that problem. So the audience for this show is product managers, and I know that they struggle. Certainly, I think they understand the what behind understanding customer needs. They get it pounded in their heads all the time. They have to be more innovative. But do you have a couple of secrets you might be able to share with them so they can be a little bit more on the cutting edge of understanding what's motivating and driving customers so that they can be a little bit more innovative?
Oh, absolutely. We talk about customer needs, but there's really 5 types of customer needs that the product manager should consider. In fact, we like thinking about the product manager as the job manager, not just the product, but what they're out to do is to help customers get the entire job done on a single platform. Eventually, that's pretty much the goal of any organization, or should be at least. And there's 5 types of need statements. One is what we've already talked about. There's this core job that the tradesmen are trying to get done, for example. They're trying to cut a piece of wood in a straight line. But there's also related jobs. And if you can help customers get multiple jobs done with one product, your product becomes more valuable. Now it's a platform that gets lots of jobs done. You can think of the iPhone as the ultimate solution, a single product that gets tens of thousands of jobs done, making it, of course, very valuable. But you can even apply this on circular saws. What are the other jobs people are trying to get done while they're cutting wood in a straight line? And knowing where they're underserved offers more insights into where you could potentially grow. So that's the second type. The third type is what we call emotional jobs. People want to be perceived a certain way and feel a certain way as a result of getting jobs done. Knowing what those emotional jobs are can certainly help in better positioning your product, giving it some more emotional appeal when you're putting your value proposition together. So that's an important ingredient. The fourth one is what we call consumption chain jobs. People have to receive the product and set it up and install it and interface with it, transport it, clean it, maintain it, upgrade it. We call all these consumption chain jobs. People don't buy products so they can store them and maintain them and upgrade them, right? They're buying them to get their core functional job and related jobs, emotional jobs done. But you can still differentiate your product along these consumption jobs. And quite honestly, talk to customers about your products. This is where they genuinely go. They talk about how it's difficult to interface with, for example. And you mentioned that up front. You talk about your remotes for your TV where they're just the buttons aren't in the right place. I can't interface with it in the way I think I should. Right? And so getting that right is critical. And then the fifth set of needs are what we call the financial metrics of the buyer. So the buyer, in many cases, may not even be the user of the product. And so they're sitting there with a set of financial metrics that they're saying, in the medical space, they have to reduce the patient's length of stay or reduce morbidity rates or so on. And if they can buy products that will help them with those high-level financial objectives, they'll buy those products. So we need to know all those different inputs from all those different categories that I mentioned. And from what we've seen over the years, those are the 5 sources of variability in success and innovation. And if you can control all of those and figure out where customers are underserved along any of those different dimensions, you have the ingredients for predictable.
Yeah, this is an extremely dynamic model, and even I haven't thought about some of these things, or maybe I intuited on them, but was never really able to articulate them in these 5 pieces. And I think that they are phenomenally communicated. And I'm thinking about this. It's almost like we're going beyond the term market segmentation into the real, the guts of customers, not literally speaking, but into the guts of what they're trying to do on a day-to-day basis. There's I watch the business news channels or news channels, and they have a crawl. And I know you have a limited number of pieces of information in the crawl, but sometimes you only get to see one item or one piece of data. But if your eyeball and the data aren't matched up, you're never going to see the data. And so they have to repeat it. And what this brings me to, it's really interesting, is like you have to really learn this process as almost like a practitioner. We talk about product managers as practitioners, and that they have to learn by doing. They have to get into the field and things like that. If a product manager can't do that because their bosses say, well, I have limited travel budgets and things like that, are there any shortcuts that you can think of that would help a product manager to really uncover a need that was unspoken?
Sure. So here's the way we typically do it. Many of the clients that we work with have been in their space for years, even decades. So there's a lot of institutional knowledge about customer needs. The problem is the teams generally don't agree on what a need is or how to structure them or format them. They don't agree there's 5 types of needs. So there's no framework around which to organize the needs. So the very first step, we often spend the day in a workshop with the product teams and marketing people and take what they have in their heads and put it in this framework. And it's usually very eye-opening because for the first time they're seeing their market through a jobs to be done lens. And it's exciting, right? So once we've done that, then we take that set of inputs, the job map and a whole set of outcomes, out to customers, their customers, external customers, and validate it. And so you've already started, right? You already have a fairly complete set of what you think the needs are. Let's go validate that with customers. We often find if our client has good institutional knowledge of the space, we can translate them into this format very nicely and get them on their way. So with that type of workshop and then maybe 3 or 4 interviews with customers, at least you're starting on the right path. So if you have limited time and budget, at least do that. And now you're right. You're in the right ballpark anyway.
That's really helpful. In these jobs, these 5 types of needs, in which book can we find those?
Well, you can see this laid out in a lot of detail in the latest book, Jobs to be Done, Theory to Practice. And you can see materials as well. We have a website called jobstobedone.com, which has a lot of useful pieces of information as well.
Well, that's really great. I have to tell you, Tony, first of all, thank you very, very much for being on this show. I'm always blown away by people who have found ways from a strategic point of view to really uncover what's motivating customers and to really be able to articulate them, defend them with some data, and get people to move in the right direction. And there's some really great insights that you've been able to share with us today, Tony. And I'm sure that our listeners will absorb this and drink this because it really is extremely valuable. And I personally appreciate the time that we have spent together. So thank you. So I thank everybody for continuing to listen to Masters of Product Management, and I hope you'll join us next time.
Looking for resources and best practices in product management? Just go to Sequent Learning Networks to gain access to real-world tools that can make a difference. It's all there at sequentlearning.com.